She didn't think twice. The horse was chained neck-leg collar standing in the road like something left there on purpose. Like bait. Evelyn Carter knelt in the dirt at midnight, hands bleeding from the rusted iron, and she freed him anyway. By dawn, armed riders lined her fence from end to end. She stood on that porch alone, rifle across her arms, and she understood one terrible thing. The horse wasn't lost. He was placed there, for her. If this story already has you holding your breath, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part to the very end. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1883 came to Cutter's Bluff the way hard years always did. Slow then, all at once. The heat had been punishing since April. By July, the creek behind Evelyn Carter's property had dropped to little more than a whisper in the rocks, and the pasture grass had gone the color of old straw. 2 of her 3 horses had lost weight she couldn't get back into them. The well still held, but she checked it every morning, the way a person checks a wound, half expecting the worst. She had been alone on the Carter Ranch for 14 months. Not entirely alone, she had Dora Finch, who came 3 mornings a week to help with washing and canning, and old Titus, the ranch hand, who'd been with Nathan since before Evelyn had even arrived in this territory. But the kind of alone she meant was a different thing. The kind that follows you from room to room. The kind that sits across from you at supper and doesn't speak. Nathan Carter had ridden out on a Thursday morning in May of the previous year. He'd told her he had business to settle with the land office in Ridgeline. He'd kissed her on the cheek, told her not to hold supper. He never came back. The sheriff, a man named Harlan Pike with soft hands and hard eyes, had conducted what he called a thorough investigation. He'd ridden out twice, asked questions that had the shape of questions, without ever quite arriving at answers, and then filed a report that said Nathan Carter had most likely met with misfortune on the trail. Wilderness accident. Wild country. These things happened. Evelyn had read that report 4 times. She still didn't believe a word of it. Nathan knew every trail between Cutter's Bluff and Ridgeline the way a man knows the bones of his own hand. He'd ridden that country since he was 16 years old. He didn't have wilderness accidents. But she had no proof of anything else. And without proof, she had only grief. And grief, she had come to understand, was not a thing that got you very far in a territory where powerful men had already decided what the truth was going to be. So she worked the ranch. She mended fences. She argued with buyers at the livestock sale who tried to underpay her because she was a woman without a husband standing at her shoulder. She wrote letters to the federal land office in Austin that went unanswered. She kept Nathan's desk exactly as he'd left it. And she waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. She only knew she wasn't finished yet. The night it changed was a Tuesday. She'd gone to bed before 9, worn down to the bone from 3 days of fence repair under a sky that gave no shade. The bedroom window was open. She always slept with it open in summer, and the air that came through was hot and dry and smelled of cedar and dust. She woke at 20 past 11. She didn't know why at first. The room was dark. The house was still. And then she heard it, a slow rhythmic drag across stone. Metal on rock. Heavy. Deliberate. She sat up. The sound came again. Evelyn pulled on her boots without lighting the lamp, took the revolver from the nightstand drawer, and walked through the dark house to the front door. She opened it and stepped onto the porch. At the end of her lane, where the road cut past her gate, a horse stood in the moonlight. Black. Tall. Powerfully built, the kind of animal that would have cost serious money once. His coat had the dull look of a horse that hadn't been watered properly in days. His head was low, and he was chained. Not hitched, not tethered, chained. 3 separate irons. One around his neck attached to the post beside the road. One around his left foreleg fixed with a heavy lock. One around his collar, an actual iron collar connected to a stake driven into the ground. Evelyn walked to the gate. She stood there for a moment just looking at him. The horse lifted his head and looked back at her. His eyes were calm, not panicked the way a frightened horse goes, not wild-eyed, not frothing. He looked at her with something that in a person she would have called patience, like he had been waiting. "All right," she said quietly. "All right, I see you." She opened the gate and crossed the road. She examined the chains in the moonlight. The neck chain had a padlock she didn't have a key for. The leg iron was crimped closed with a bolt. The collar was locked at the back with something she'd never seen before, not a standard lock, not a hinge pin. She pressed her thumb against it, turned, it felt something give slightly. She went back to the barn for tools. She returned with a cold chisel and a hammer, the revolver still in her waistband. She worked quietly. The horse stood perfectly still while she chiseled through the bolt on the leg iron. When the metal fell away, he didn't move, didn't dance sideways, didn't pull. He waited. "Good boy," she murmured. "We're getting there." The neck chain was harder. She had to brace the post with her shoulder to get the angle right, and by the time the padlock gave her hands were slick with sweat. The chain fell into the dirt with a sound like something final. The collar took her nearly 20 minutes. The lock mechanism was unlike anything she'd seen purposefully complicated, she thought. Like someone had designed it specifically to take time. To make sure whoever freed this horse would be standing in that road for a good long while. That thought made her stop. She straightened slowly and looked at the trees on either side of the road. Still. Dark. Nothing moving. She looked back at the ridgeline to the east. Nothing she could see. She went back to the collar and worked until it opened. The iron fell to the ground. The horse shook himself a long full-body shudder and then turned and followed her through the gate. She gave him water first, then a small amount of grain, watching the way he ate. He was hungry, but not desperate. He'd been watered at some point in the last day, she thought. Just not enough. She checked his legs for injuries, nothing serious. Some rubbing from the chains around the left foreleg. She cleaned and wrapped it. He stood in the barn stall and watched her work with those same patient eyes. She found the brand on his left shoulder while she was checking his coat. It was unlike any livestock brand she recognized. She'd been around ranching her whole adult life, and she knew the marks of every significant operation within 50 miles of Cutter's Bluff. This wasn't a ranch brand. It was too precise, too deliberate. It looked almost like a surveyor's notation numbers and a partial letter series burned into the hide. She stared at it for a long time. "Where did you come from?" she said. The horse blinked at her. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat in the barn on an overturned bucket with the lantern turned low and the revolver across her knees, and she listened to the dark. Nothing came. By the time the sky started to gray in the east, she had almost convinced herself she was being foolish. A stray horse. Unusual chains. Yes, but it was a strange world, and people did strange things. She'd water him properly, let him rest, and start asking around. She went inside to put the coffee on. She was still standing at the stove when old Titus knocked on the kitchen door. "Mrs. Carter." His voice was wrong, too flat, too careful. "You need to come out." She went. At the fence line, her northern fence running along the road, 2 riders sat their horses in the early light, still as carved wood, watching the house. Evelyn looked south. 2 more. She turned east, where the creek line ran through a stand of cottonwoods. She counted 3 riders in the trees. Maybe 4. "They was there when I come in," Titus said very quietly from just behind her. "Don't know how long before that." "How many altogether?" "I counted 8. Could be more I ain't seen yet." 8 riders. Before sunrise, positioned at every approach to her property. She went back inside. She took the rifle down from the wall rack and checked the load. She put the revolver in her apron pocket. She poured herself a cup of coffee, hands steady, which surprised her, and she drank half of it standing at the kitchen window. Then she went out to the porch and sat down in the rocking chair with the rifle across her lap and waited. He arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning. He came alone, which was either confidence or theater, she suspected both. He rode a gray horse well-bred and well-kept, the kind of horse that announced money before its rider opened his mouth. He was dressed in a dark suit, which was unusual for a man arriving at a working ranch on a summer morning. His boots were clean. His hat was good. His hands, when he removed a glove to open her gate, were smooth. He rode up to the foot of her porch steps and stopped. "Mrs. Carter," he said. His voice was pleasant, a salesman's voice, warm on the surface with no bottom underneath. "My name is Silas Mercer. I believe you may have something that belongs to me." Evelyn looked at him over the barrel of the rifle, which she had not raised, but had not set down either. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I don't believe we've met. We haven't had the pleasure, no." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm given to understand you found a stray horse last night on the county road." "I found a chained horse," she said. "Chained in 3 places, on a public road." Something crossed his face, too fast to name. "Animals do get loose sometimes, Mrs. Carter. The chains were a precaution. He's a difficult animal. Dangerous, actually. I'd hate to think you'd put yourself at risk trying to manage him. He seemed manageable enough to me." "Yes." He looked toward the barn. "I'd like him back." Evelyn said nothing for a moment. "What's his name?" she asked. Mercer blinked. "I beg your pardon. The horse. What's his name?" A pause. Brief, but there. "He doesn't have a name. He's a working animal." "What's his brand mean?" Another pause. Longer. "Mrs. Carter, because I've seen a lot of brands in my life," she said, keeping her voice level. "And that mark on his shoulder is not a livestock brand. I'd like to know what it is before I hand any animal over to anyone." Mercer looked at her for a long moment. The pleasantness in his expression thinned slightly at the edges, like paint over something harder. "That horse is my property," he said, "and I'm asking you politely to return him. And I'm asking you politely," she said, "to tell me his name." The silence between them stretched. "I'll come back this afternoon," Mercer said finally, "with documentation. I trust that will satisfy your concerns." He replaced his glove. "I'd ask that you keep him secured in the meantime. As I said, difficult animal." He turned his horse and rode back down the lane. Evelyn watched him go until he reached the road. She watched him say something to the 2 riders still positioned at her north fence. She watched all 3 of them ride away. She looked south. Those riders were gone too. She sat on the porch for a while after that, the rifle across her knees and the coffee going cold on the rail beside her. And she thought about the fact that Silas Mercer, a man who'd arrived with 8 armed riders before sunrise, did not know the name of his own horse. And she thought about the brand, the precise survey notation brand on that animal's left shoulder. And she thought about Nathan, about what business he'd had with the land office in Ridgeline, about the fact that he'd never come home. She stood up slowly. "Titus," she called. He appeared from the side of the house. "Go get Dora," she said. "Tell her I need her here today. And Titus." She looked at him steadily. "Don't tell anyone in town why." He nodded once and left without asking questions. That was one of the things she valued most about Titus. He understood which questions needed to be asked and which ones were better left alone. Evelyn went back inside. She went to Nathan's desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one she'd never touched since he'd gone, the one she'd been telling herself she wasn't ready for, and she began to go through what was there. There were maps, survey maps hand-drawn with notations in Nathan's careful script. Land grid references she didn't recognize. Dates, names of people she'd never heard of alongside the names of a few she had. There were letters, unfinished letters, drafts she thought of correspondence he'd never sent. One of them was addressed to the Federal Land Office. It described something he called a systematic pattern of forced surrender affecting property owners along the Ridgeline water corridor. There was a list. 9 names. Ranchers and homesteaders. Some she knew, some she didn't. After each name a date. After each date a single word. Refused. She sat back. Her hands were not entirely steady now. She turned back to the maps. She traced the land grid with one finger. The parcels ran along the creek watershed, the same water system that fed her ranch, that fed most of the smallhold properties in this part of the territory. She thought about Silas Mercer's clean boots and pleasant voice and dead eyes. She thought about the brand on the stallion's shoulder, which she now understood was not a livestock mark at all. It was a survey marker, burned into the horse's hide so it would travel with the animal. Portable. Impossible to destroy without destroying the horse. The horse was carrying something, evidence of something. Something someone wanted back badly enough to chain him to a post outside her gate in the dead of night, and then arrive with 8 armed riders at sunrise. She closed the drawer. She walked to the window. The stallion stood in the paddock, head up, watching the road. "Nathan," she said quietly to the empty room. "What did you find?" The house gave her nothing back but silence. But for the first time in 14 months, Evelyn Carter felt something other than grief. She felt certain. She didn't know exactly what she was up against yet. She didn't know how large it was, or how deep it went, or how many men Silas Mercer could put on a road if he chose to. But she knew this. She had freed that horse for a reason, and she was not giving him back. Dora Finch arrived before 9. She came in through the kitchen door the way she always did without knocking, with a basket on one arm and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was 61 years old, built like a woman who had worked hard every day of her life and intended to keep doing so, and she had been widowed twice, which meant in Evelyn's experience that very little surprised her and almost nothing frightened her. She took one look at Evelyn's face and set the basket down. "Titus told me there were riders," she said. 8 of them, before sunrise. Dora pulled out a chair and sat down without being asked. And now, gone, for the moment. Evelyn set Nathan's papers on the table between them. "I need you to look at something." Dora looked at the list first. She read each name slowly, moving her lips slightly the way she did when she was taking something seriously. When she got to the bottom, she looked up. "I know 3 of these names," she said. "Which 3? "Tom Aldrich. He sold his place 2 summers ago, sold it fast and cheap, and moved his family to Oklahoma. Didn't say goodbye to hardly anyone." She tapped the paper. "Rupert Gaines. Same thing, gone inside a month, spring of last year. And this one." She pointed. "Caleb Rowan." Evelyn went still. "Caleb Rowan hasn't sold anything." "No," Dora said. "Caleb Rowan disappeared 6 months before Nathan did." The kitchen was very quiet. Nobody talked about it much, Dora continued. "He was a bachelor, no family close by. Sheriff Pike said he'd probably just moved on, but his cattle were still in the pasture when the bank took the property. Men don't leave their cattle." Evelyn looked at the list again. 9 names. Nathan's was not on it, but Nathan had written it. Nathan had known these names. Nathan had ridden out to Ridgeline to do something about what he knew. "There's more," Evelyn said. She showed Dora the survey maps. Dora studied them for a long moment. She wasn't a surveyor, and neither was Evelyn. But the pattern was clear enough, even to an untrained eye. The marked parcels ran in a line, a deliberate connected line along the water corridor. "Someone's been buying up this land," Dora said, "or taking it." Dora set the map down. She looked at Evelyn steadily. "The horse. The brand on his shoulder matches Nathan's notation on the lower grid map. Right here." Evelyn pointed to a small mark in the corner of the survey. "It's not a ranch brand. It's a land reference marker, survey notation, which means the horse has been used to transport the documentation," Dora said. She said it very quietly, like she was working it out as she spoke. "Someone put evidence on the animal itself because paper can be burned. A desk can be searched. But a horse can be moved, hidden, passed from one person to another." "Yes. Nathan's horse," Dora said. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She pressed her fingers flat against the table. "I don't know that for certain yet. But you think it." "I think," Evelyn said carefully, "that whoever chained that animal to my gate last night wanted me to find him." And I think Silas Mercer wants him back badly enough to put 8 riders on my fence before sunrise. And I think—" She stopped. "Say it," Dora said. "I think Nathan found out what was happening to this land. And I think that's why he never came home." Dora was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over Evelyn's. Not in a soft way, in a firm, deliberate way, the way a woman holds on to something she intends to keep. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need you to stay, and I need you to not tell anyone in town that you're here, or why." "Done." Dora stood up and moved the basket to the counter. "I brought preserves and 2 loaves. We're not going to starve anyway." Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. Mercer came back at 2 in the afternoon. This time he brought a man with him, not a rider, not an enforcer. A man in a wool coat carrying a leather satchel, which in the middle of a Texas summer meant he was either very devoted to appearances or very certain he was untouchable. He introduced himself as Gerald Fitch, representing the Mercer Land and Cattle Company out of San Antonio. They stood on the porch. Evelyn did not invite them inside. Fitch opened the satchel and produced a document. He held it out toward her. She didn't take it. "Bill of sale," Fitch said. "Registered in Ridgeline. The animal in question, a black stallion approximately 7 years of age, was purchased by the Mercer Land and Cattle Company from a breeder in Laredo 18 months ago. All proper and legal, Mrs. Carter." "May I see the registration number?" Fitch blinked. "I beg your pardon. The livestock registration number. Every purchased animal in this territory is supposed to have one filed with the county recorder's office. If it was a legal sale, there's a number." Fitch looked at the document. He looked at Mercer. Mercer's expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had shifted. "The registration is in process," Fitch said. "Is it?" Evelyn said. It was not a question. "Mrs. Carter." Mercer stepped forward slightly, just slightly, not aggressive, but deliberate, like a man moving pieces on a board. "I understand you've had a difficult year. Losing a husband is a painful thing. It can make a person see complications where there are none." His voice was kind, careful, the voice of a man who had practiced being patient with people he considered beneath him. "This is a simple matter of property recovery. I have no desire to cause you any distress." "Then answer one question," she said. He waited. "What is the brand on his left shoulder?" The pause this time was longer than it had been that morning. "A breeder's mark," Fitch said, jumping in. "Standard practice in—" "That's not a breeder's mark," Evelyn said. "And you know it isn't." Silence. "I'd like you both to leave my property now," she said. Mercer looked at her for a long moment. That pleasantness was gone now, fully gone, not even pretended at. What was underneath it was not rage. Rage would have been easier to manage. What was underneath it was something colder and more patient. "I'll give you until tomorrow morning," he said, "to reconsider." "I don't need until tomorrow morning." He put his hat back on. He turned and walked to his horse without another word. Fitch scrambled after him, stuffing the document back into the satchel. At the gate, Mercer paused. He didn't turn around. "Your husband was a stubborn man, Mrs. Carter," he said. "I always respected that about him." He rode away. Evelyn stood on the porch until they were out of sight. Then she went inside and stood very still in the hallway for almost a full minute. Your husband was a stubborn man. Past tense, deliberate, a message dressed up as a pleasantry. She walked to the kitchen. "Dora," she said, and her voice was steady, which she was grateful for. "Titus, come in here." They came. She told them what Mercer had said. Dora's jaw tightened. Titus, who was not a man of many words, set his coffee cup down very carefully on the counter as if he needed something to do with his hands. "He as good as told you," Titus said. "He told me—" Evelyn agreed. "He wanted me to know. He wanted me frightened." "Are you?" Dora asked. Evelyn thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "But I was frightened for 14 months, and I didn't do anything with it. I'm done with that." She went out to the barn in the late afternoon. The stallion had eaten and rested, and he looked better for it. His coat still dull, but his eyes brighter, his head up. She sat on the stall rail and looked at the brand on his shoulder again. This time with Nathan's survey map in her hand, the copy she'd made on a fresh sheet of paper, because she didn't want to bring the original out here. The notation matched. She was certain of it now. "Nathan marked you," she said to the horse. "Didn't he?" The animal turned his head toward her. His dark eyes held that same quality of patient attention she'd noticed the night before. It was unsettling in a way she couldn't quite name, the feeling that she was being observed rather than watching. She reached out and ran her hand along his neck. There was something else she hadn't noticed last night when she'd been focused on the chains. Low on his neck beneath the mane, a small scar healed but distinct. Too clean to be an accident. Someone had cut something out of there. Recently, she thought. Maybe within the last few weeks. Someone had searched this horse, taken something from him or tried to. Whatever they'd found or failed to find, they'd chained him afterward, left him on her road. Either because they'd gotten what they came for and no longer needed the animal, or because they wanted whoever found him to think they'd gotten what they came for. She pressed her fingers against the scar and thought hard. Nathan had been thorough. She knew that about him better than almost anything else. His thoroughness, his stubbornness, the way he didn't leave things half done. If he'd hidden something on this horse, he wouldn't have hidden it in only one place. She went over the animal inch by inch. It took her 40 minutes. She found it in the left rear hoof, packed into the sulcus beside the frog, with a wad of oilcloth to keep it dry. A folded piece of paper sealed with wax, the wax stamped with the letter C. Her hands were shaking when she peeled the oilcloth back. She didn't open it in the barn. She put it inside her dress against her skin and walked back to the house. She opened it at Nathan's desk with the door locked and the curtains drawn and Dora sitting across from her. It was a single page. Dense handwriting, not Nathan's, she realized after a moment. Someone else. But the notation style matched the maps in Nathan's drawer. Same surveyor's precision. Same habit of writing coordinates in the margin. At the top of the page, a name she didn't recognize, Rowan CM, Caleb Rowan. The man who had disappeared 6 months before Nathan. The letter was addressed to no one specifically, or to whoever found it. It described in careful and specific language a meeting that had taken place in Ridgeline in the winter of 1882. Present at the meeting, representatives of the Mercer Land and Cattle Company, Deputy Sheriff Harlan Pike, and a county recorder named Ed Suttle. The purpose of the meeting, as Rowan had understood it from documents he'd managed to photograph, the coordinated transfer of water corridor land from smallhold owners to Mercer's company, using a combination of forged tax delinquency notices, manufactured debt claims, and for those who refused to sell other means. Other means. At the bottom of the page in different ink added later, she thought, "If you are reading this, Nathan Carter sent you. Trust no one in Cutter's Bluff with a badge. There is one man, Caleb's brother Ellis Rowan, sheep ranch north of the ridge. He has the rest." Evelyn read it twice. She looked up at Dora. Dora had been reading along, leaning across the desk. Her face was pale. "Pike?" Dora said. "Pike. He ran Nathan's investigation." "He ran it," Evelyn said. "And he filed a report that said wilderness accident." The room was very still. "Ellis Rowan," Dora said. "Do you know him?" "I know of him. He doesn't come to town much. Keeps to himself up on that ridge." She paused. "He's going to be watched, Evelyn. If Mercer knows about Caleb, he knows about Ellis." "I know." Evelyn folded the letter carefully. "Which means I can't send anyone to him. I have to go myself." "Not tonight. No, not tonight. Tonight I stay here, and I make sure that horse is safe and that this paper is hidden somewhere that isn't this house." She stood up. "Dora, I need you to think about whether there is anyone in this county, anyone at all that we can trust." Dora thought about it for a long time. Judge Alderman in Ridgeline. she said at last. He's old, and he's half-deaf, and he doesn't owe Silas Mercer a thing that I know of. And he hated Ed Suttle before Suttle died, which in my experience is a good sign in a man. How do you know he hated Suttle? Because I was married to Harold Finch for 22 years, and Harold sat on the county records committee with aldermen for 15 of them, and aldermen said twice in my kitchen that Ed Suttle was a man who'd sold his soul so early in life he'd forgotten he ever had one. Evelyn looked at her. Dora. I have ears, Dora said simply. I always had ears. Harold used to say I listened too much. I say you can never listen enough. Can you get a letter to alderman without it going through the Cutter's Bluff post? My sister's boy drives freight to Ridgeline on Thursdays, day after tomorrow. Good. Evelyn moved to the window. Outside, the light was going amber and long. We write the letter tonight. Everything we have, the maps, the list, the document. We copy it all. Copies go with the letter. The originals stay hidden here. Hidden where? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. In the horse. Dora raised her eyebrows. Not the way it was before, Evelyn said. Mercer's people already searched him. That's what the scar is. They think they got whatever was there. They won't search him again. She paused. I'll find a place they missed. She was back in the barn by full dark, working by lantern light, when Titus appeared in the doorway. Rider on the south ridge, he said. Watching the house. Just one. One I can see. Let him watch. She didn't look up from what she was doing. Is the Winchester loaded? Yes, ma'am. Keep it close, but don't point it at anything unless something points at you first. Titus nodded and disappeared. The stallion stood patient and still while she worked. She had decided against the hoof this time, too obvious now that it had been used once. She found a seam inside the saddle blanket that had been stored in the stall, one of Nathan's old ones, still smelling of the cedar chest she kept tack in. She opened the seam with a small knife and slid the oilcloth packet inside, then stitched it closed with a heavy needle and waxed thread. When she was done, she sat down on the barn floor, back against the stall wall, and let herself be tired for a moment. I know you belong to him, she said to the horse. She wasn't sure why she kept talking to the animal. It wasn't a habit she'd ever had before. Maybe it was simply because the alternative was silence, and she had had enough silence to last her the rest of her life. Or maybe you came to him. I don't know the whole story yet. The stallion lowered his head until his nose was level with her shoulder. She reached up and laid a hand on his face. I'm going to find out, she said. I promise you that. 10. The letter that went out with Dora's nephew Thursday morning was 4 pages long. It contained a summary of every document Evelyn had found with copies of the most critical items. The list of names, the grid coordinates, the key passages from Caleb Rowan's hidden note. She wrote it in plain language without drama, the way Nathan had taught her to write when something important needed to be said clearly. She addressed it to Judge Warren Alderman, Ridgeline County Courthouse, and she signed her name at the bottom without hesitation. The same morning, just after the freight wagon left, Deputy Harlan Pike rode up her lane. He came alone. He was in his uniform, star-polished hat, straight. He was a man who cared about appearances. She had always noticed that. He kept his boots clean the same way Mercer did, which she was beginning to think meant something specific about a certain type of man in a certain type of position. He dismounted at the porch steps. Mrs. Carter. He turned his hat in his hands. An old habit, performative now. I've had a complaint filed. By whom? Silas Mercer. Concerning a horse. Silas Mercer filed a complaint with you specifically, she said. I'm the deputy sheriff of this county, ma'am. You are? She agreed. And I've always found it interesting, Deputy Pike, that you conducted my husband's investigation yourself. Without a marshal, without federal oversight. A man goes missing on a traveled road, and the full extent of the inquiry is 2 visits from the county deputy. Pike's expression didn't change. He was practiced at stillness, she noted. The kind of stillness that came from long experience of saying nothing in situations where saying something might be dangerous. "That investigation was thorough," he said. "I'm sure it was," she said. "Can I see the complaint Mr. Mercer filed?" "It's a verbal complaint at this stage." "Then it's not a complaint," she said. "It's a conversation. And as far as I know, a verbal conversation between a wealthy businessman and a county deputy is not grounds for me to hand over an animal I found abandoned and injured on a public road." She paused. "Is it?" Pike looked at her for a long moment. "I'd advise you to be careful, Mrs. Carter," he said. "I'd advise the same to you, Deputy." He put his hat back on. He rode away without another word. Evelyn watched him go. And then she saw what she'd been half expecting, half hoping, because hope was information, instead of turning toward town. Pike rode east, toward the ridgeline, toward the direction of the Mercer operation. She watched him until he disappeared. Then she went inside and told Dora and Titus what she'd seen. "He reported back," Dora said, "immediately." "So Pike knows about Rowan's letter," Dora said. "Mercer might. If they searched the horse before they left him for me, if they found the letter, they know what's in it. They know there's a brother." She stopped. "We need to get to Ellis Rowan before they do." Titus spoke from the corner. "I can ride tonight." They both looked at him. "I know that ridge," he said. "Been up there twice with Nathan before. I know where the Rowan sheep camp sits." He looked at Evelyn directly. "Nathan trusted me with worse than this, Mrs. Carter." She thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. "All right," she said. "Take the sorrel, not the stallion. And Titus, if anything looks wrong up there, if there are riders, if the camp looks disturbed." "I turn around," he said. "I know." "You come back," she said. "Come back and we figure out something else." He left before dark. Evelyn spent that night at the desk with Dora asleep in the spare room, and the stallion in the barn, and the revolver at her elbow, writing down everything she could remember in the order she'd learned it. Not for the letter. The letter was already gone. This was for herself. Because she had learned in the last 48 hours that information was only safe when it existed in more than one place, and the safest place she had was her own memory. She wrote until her hand cramped. Then she sat in the dark and waited for morning, and thought about Nathan, and thought about Caleb Rowan, who had disappeared into the territory's silences 6 months before her husband, and thought about a list of 9 names with refused written beside each one. She thought about what it cost a person to refuse, and she thought about what it meant that she had freed that horse anyway, knowing nothing, feeling only that something was wrong, acting only on instinct, and the stubborn conviction she'd carried since childhood, that a chained animal was a wrong that needed righting. She had freed him without knowing what he carried, without knowing what freeing him would cost. And she found sitting there in Nathan's chair in the deep quiet of that Texas night that she would do it again. She would do it again without hesitation. Whatever was coming, whatever Mercer had waiting on the other side of this, she had made her choice the moment she knelt in that road with a cold chisel in her bleeding hands. She wasn't turning back from it. She never had been. Titus came back at dawn. Evelyn heard the sorrel's hooves in the yard before she heard the knock, and she was already at the door when he reached the porch. He looked like a man who had ridden hard and slept not at all, which was exactly what he had done. His face was drawn tight in a way that told her before he opened his mouth that what he'd found was not good. She stepped back and let him in. He sat down at the kitchen table and she poured him coffee without asking. Dora appeared in the doorway of the spare room, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, and took one look at Titus and sat down too. "Ellis Rowan is alive," Titus said. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "But the sheep camp is gone," he continued. "Cleared out, not ransacked, cleared. Like someone packed deliberately and left in a hurry. The fire pit was still warm when I got there, maybe 4 or 5 hours ahead of me." "Someone warned him," Dora said, "or he saw riders coming and didn't wait to find out who they were." Titus wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I followed the track north off the ridge. It went into the creek bed, deliberate to break the trail. I lost it after about a mile." He looked at Evelyn. "But I found something else," He reached into his coat and produced a piece of folded cloth canvas weathered. He set it on the table. Evelyn unfolded it. It was a map. Rougher than Nathan's survey maps, hand-drawn without the same precision, but she could read the landmarks, the ridge, the creek watershed, the southern boundary of the Mercer operation, and marked on it in red chalk 3 locations she didn't recognize. Each marked with the same symbol, a small circle with a line through it. Under the map, scratched directly into the canvas, in letters so small she had to lean close. Ask the widow at Carter Ranch. She has the horse. I left what I could. E.R. The 3 of them sat in silence for a moment. He knew about me, Evelyn said. Nathan must have told him, Dora said. Or told Caleb and Caleb told Ellis. Which means Nathan was working with them. With both of them. She pressed a finger against one of the red chalk circles. What are these locations? That one's the old mill property on the North Creek, Titus said. Abandoned about 3 years ago, the owner sold up fast, same as the others. The second one, I think, is what used to be the Aldrich parcel. Tom Aldrich, the one who moved his family to Oklahoma. And the third? Titus was quiet for a second. That's your eastern pasture line, Mrs. Carter. The boundary where your property meets the water corridor. Evelyn looked up. Your land is next, Dora said quietly. It landed like a stone in still water. Of course it was. Of course. A widow, no husband, a ranch that sat directly on the water system they were working their way along. She had been so focused on understanding what had happened to Nathan that she hadn't stepped back far enough to see the shape of the whole thing. She was not just a witness. She was the next target. She stood up and moved to the window. The morning was already hot, the way mornings in July always were. In this territory, no gradual warming, just heat arriving, like it had somewhere to be. How much time do I have? She said. Not to anyone in particular, thinking out loud. Depends on whether Mercer knows about the map, Titus said. If Ellis left that for you to find, he may have left something else for Mercer to find. A false trail. Something to buy time. Or he left nothing, and Mercer already knows every move we're making, Evelyn said. That's possible too. She turned around. The letter went out yesterday. How long to Ridgeline? Day and a half by freight wagon, Dora said. My nephew drives careful, he doesn't push the horses. So Alderman gets it tomorrow afternoon at the earliest, assuming he reads it immediately, assuming he believes it, assuming he acts on it. She stopped. There were too many assumptions in that chain, too many places where it could break. We can't wait for Alderman. Then what? Dora said. The 3 marked locations on this map. Ellis left them for a reason. He said he left what he could, which means he left something at those locations. Evidence, documentation, something that was too large or too risky to carry. She looked at the map again. We need to get to those locations before Mercer does. All 3 of them, starting with the old mill. If Nathan and Caleb and Ellis were working together, the mill is where they would have built the central cache. It's abandoned off the main road, no one with any current claim to it. She folded the map carefully and put it inside her dress, same as Rowan's letter the night before. Against her skin was the safest place she had. Titus, can you write again? He set down his coffee cup. Yes, ma'am. Not yet. Rest for 2 hours. I need you able to think clearly when we get there, not just stay in the saddle. She looked at Dora. I need you to stay here with the horse. Don't let anyone near that barn. If Pike comes back or anyone else in a badge, you don't know where I've gone. I never do, Dora said simply. They rode out at mid-morning, Evelyn and Titus, taking the long way around that avoided the main road and the ridge line where she'd seen riders watching. She carried the rifle and the revolver. Titus carried his own rifle and a skinning knife he'd had for 30 years, which in her experience was more useful than a knife a man hadn't broken in yet. They didn't talk much on the ride. That was fine. She needed to think. What she kept coming back to was the timing. Mercer had left that horse at her gate specifically. He or whoever was working with him had chosen her road, her gate, her property. and she'd been thinking of that as a threat, as bait. But Rowan's note changed the shape of it. Ask the widow at Carter Ranch. She has the horse. Ellis Rowan had written that before he fled the sheep camp. Which meant he'd known the horse was coming to her. Which meant someone had planned it that way, had placed the stallion at her gate deliberately. Yes, but not as a trap for her. As a delivery. Someone inside Mercer's operation or close to it had gotten hold of that horse and left him where they knew she would find him. Left him in chains because a horse standing loose in the road might be moved along before she came out. The chains weren't restraint. The chains were an anchor. Someone had trusted her. Someone who knew Nathan Carter's widow and believed she would do exactly what she had done. She turned that over and over in her mind for the rest of the ride. The old mill had been idle long enough that the wood had gone silver gray, and the creek had reclaimed part of the foundation. She and Titus dismounted a quarter-mile back and walked in, keeping to the tree line, moving slowly. Nobody was there. She went in first, Titus covering the door. The interior was dim and smelled of old water and rot, and something else, gun oil, she thought, which was out of place in an abandoned building. It took her 15 minutes to find it. Behind the millstone, underneath a section of flooring that had been cut and reset so cleanly she nearly missed it, was a tin box, sealed with wax, heavy. She carried it outside into the light and opened it with the knife. Papers, dozens of them. Survey certificates, land transfer documents, notarized affidavits, correspondence on county recorder's office letterhead with Ed Suttle's signature, and beside every signature, a second signature she recognized from Nathan's files. Harlan Pike. Not just complicit, not just looking the other way. Signing. Authorizing. As a legal witness to every fraudulent transfer, every forged tax notice, every manufactured debt claim. She sat back on her heels and looked at Titus. He had read along over her shoulder. His jaw was tight. "This is everything," he said. "This is enough," she said, which was different. Enough was what mattered right now. She repacked the tin, wrapped it in her saddlebag, and they rode hard back toward the ranch. They were a mile out when Titus pulled his horse up sharply. "Smoke," he said. She looked. A thin column the direction of home. Not black, not fire. Gray. A cook fire or a signal. "Fast," she said, and they rode. They came into the yard to find 3 horses tied at the gate that she didn't recognize, and Dora standing on the porch with her arms crossed and an expression that was 1 part fury and 2 parts relief. Beside Dora stood a man Evelyn had never seen before. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, lean and weathered in the way of men who spent most of their lives outside. His clothes were working clothes, not clean, not well kept. He had the kind of stillness about him that wasn't practiced the way Pike's was. It was natural, the stillness of a man who had learned to be quiet because noise got people killed. 2 other men stood back near the barn. She assessed them quickly. Same working clothes, same careful stillness. They were not Mercer's men. She was certain of that, in the way she was certain of very few things, instinctively and completely. "Mrs. Carter," the young man said. He didn't move toward her, kept his hands visible. "My name is Ellis Rowan." She stayed in the saddle for a moment longer than necessary. "You're supposed to be running," she said. "I was," he said. "Then I decided running wasn't going to get any of us very far." A pause. "I heard Titus was on the ridge last night. When I found the camp, I figured you'd found the map." "I found it." She dismounted. "Come inside." Ellis Rowan told his story at the kitchen table, which was becoming, Evelyn thought, the center of whatever this war was. He told it in the flat, economical way of someone who had rehearsed it not for drama, but for clarity, who had been telling it in his head for a long time, waiting for someone worth telling it to. Caleb had been the one who'd first understood what Mercer was doing. This was 2 years ago. Caleb had gone to Nathan because Nathan was the kind of man everybody knew it, who didn't let things go, and who had connections to the Territorial Land Office through an old Army surveying colleague. Nathan had connected them to a man in Austin who worked in the Federal Land Division. Together, the three of them had spent 6 months building documentation. Caleb disappeared in November, Ellis said. I found his horse 3 days later, 3 miles from the mill. No sign of Caleb anywhere. He looked at his hands. Nathan kept going after that. He said stopping would mean Caleb disappeared for nothing. Evelyn said nothing. She kept her face still. He came to me in April, Ellis continued, said he was going to Ridgeline to the federal contact there to deliver the full documentation package. He said if he wasn't back in 10 days, I should assume the worst and get the evidence out of the mill and to the federal land office in Austin directly. Bypass the local system entirely. He stopped. He gave me the horse to hold. Said the horse was carrying the primary evidence, the documents that would tie the land transfers back to the original fraud. The brand, Evelyn said. Survey notation from the original territorial land grant records. The horse was physically present at 3 of the key transactions. Nathan used the brand as a living cross-reference. If you had the horse, you had the proof the documentation was authentic and not fabricated after the fact. Dora made a sound that was not quite a word. Clever, Titus said from his post by the door. Nathan was a thorough man, Ellis said, and then he looked at Evelyn directly, really looked at her the way someone looks when they are about to say something they have been carrying too long. Mrs. Carter, I need to tell you something that I should have told you sooner. I didn't because I wasn't sure who could be trusted. I'm still not completely sure, but I'm out of time and so are you. Say it, she said, same as Dora had said to her 2 days ago. Nathan is not dead. The kitchen went absolutely silent. Evelyn heard her own heartbeat. I don't know where he is, Ellis said quickly. I want to be clear about that, I don't know. But the man in Austin, the federal contact, a man named Aldous Webb, sent word to me 3 months ago through a circuit preacher who comes through this county. He said Nathan Carter had been taken. Not killed. Taken. Held somewhere as insurance. Mercer doesn't want him dead because a dead man can become a martyr. A missing man is just a missing man. Evelyn pressed both palms flat on the table. She made herself breathe. Where? She said. I don't know. Webb didn't know. Or if he knew, he didn't put it in a message traveling by circuit preacher. Ellis leaned forward. But here's what I know: Mercer keeps his leverage close. He doesn't farm it out. Whatever he's holding, whoever he's holding, it's somewhere inside his own operation. Evelyn looked at the tin box sitting on the counter, at the stack of papers inside it, at the months of work that Nathan and Caleb and Ellis had poured into building something solid enough to stand up in a federal court. She looked at Ellis Rowan. You said you're out of time, she said. Why now? What happened? He reached into his coat and put a folded paper on the table. She opened it. It was a notice. Official county letterhead. It stated that the Carter Ranch property, described by its full legal boundary, was subject to tax delinquency proceedings under Section 14 of the Territorial Revenue Act, and that unless the outstanding amount was paid in full, within 72 hours, the property would pass into receivership. She looked at the date on the notice. It had been filed 2 days ago, the day after she'd refused Mercer on her porch. Outstanding amount, she said. $412, Ellis said. Which I would wager everything I own is a number fabricated out of nothing, same as all the others. I pay my taxes, she said. She said it quietly, but there was something underneath it, a controlled fury, clean and cold. I have receipts going back 6 years. I know. Ellis's voice was steady. And when the federal case is open and the fraud is exposed, those receipts will matter. But right now in this county, with Pike holding the badge and Mercer's name on half the official documents right now, that notice is legal. 72 hours, Titus said. 72 hours, Ellis confirmed. Evelyn stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a moment with her back to the room, looking at the yard, at the barn, at the pasture line where Nathan's survey map had marked her eastern boundary with a red chalk circle. Her land was next. It had always been her land next, and the 72 hours wasn't accidental. Mercer had filed that notice the day after she'd refused him, knowing exactly how long it would take for a letter to reach Ridgeline and get any kind of response. He had calculated the margins carefully. He was telling her something with that number, not just threatening her, but showing her how precisely he understood her situation. She turned back around. "The letter to Judge Alderman," she said to Dora. "Left yesterday morning. When Alderman gets it, if he acts on it, what can he do?" Dora looked at Ellis. Ellis thought about it. "Alderman has authority to issue an injunction against a property proceeding if there's documented evidence of fraud in the underlying claim," he said slowly. "But he'd need the documentation in hand before the 72 hours are up. He can't issue an injunction on the basis of a letter describing documentation." "He needs to see it," Evelyn said. "He needs to see it." She looked at the tin box. "Someone has to ride to Ridgeline today," she said. "Today, not tomorrow. With the tin box and the documents from Nathan's desk and copies of everything else." She paused. "And someone has to stay here. Because if Mercer doesn't get a response from me today, no capitulation, no surrender, he's going to move up his timeline." "I'll ride," Ellis said immediately. "No." She shook her head. "If Mercer has anyone watching the roads, and he does a man he doesn't recognize riding hard toward Ridgeline the same day that notice was served, is going to get stopped. And if he knows who you are, it's worse." She paused. "Dora." Dora looked at her. "Your nephew, the freight wagon. He's not due to run again until—" "I know, but can he be persuaded to make an unscheduled trip today, with a passenger?" Dora was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "For family, yes." "You're not family." "No," Dora said. "But I raised that boy after his mama died and he knows it." She was already pushing back her chair. "I'll need to send word to him this morning." "Titus can take it." Titus nodded. "The documents travel in the freight wagon," Evelyn said. "Inside something ordinary, a crate, a barrel, whatever your nephew is carrying. Nobody stops a freight wagon on an established run. It's too visible, too many questions." She moved to the desk and started pulling the copied documents into order. "Dora, you're comfortable talking to a judge." Dora gave her a look that said the question was barely worth answering. "I was married to a man who sat on a county records committee for 15 years. I know how a legal proceeding works better than half the lawyers in this territory." "Good." Evelyn pressed the stack of papers into her hands. "Tell him everything. Don't let him minimize it. Don't let him say it needs more time. Show him the list. Show him the transfer documents. Show him Pike's signatures." She paused. "Tell him about Nathan." Dora's hands tightened on the papers. "Tell him a man is being held," Evelyn said. "Alive, and that every hour Alderman waits is an hour that might matter." Dora left with Titus before noon. The house was quieter without her. Though Ellis and his 2 men were still there, she'd asked them to stay, and Ellis had agreed without being asked twice. He and his men set themselves up in the barn and the bunkhouse, with a view of every approach to the property. It was a different thing having people on her side with guns. She hadn't realized until it changed how heavy the alone had been. She spent the afternoon going back through Nathan's desk for anything she might have missed. She found letters she'd already seen and maps she'd already copied. She found a photograph small creased at one corner of Nathan standing with 2 other men beside a creek. She didn't recognize the creek. One of the men she thought might be Caleb Rowan from Ellis's description. The other she didn't know. She sat with that photograph for a long time. Then she got up and went out to the paddock. The stallion came to the fence when she approached. He'd been doing that, coming to her seeking contact in the quiet way of a horse that had decided to trust someone. She leaned on the rail and let him put his nose against her hand. "He's alive," she told the animal. She said it out loud because saying it out loud made it real in a way that keeping it inside her didn't. "He's alive somewhere, and I am going to find him." The stallion breathed warm against her palm. She didn't know how. She didn't know where. She didn't have enough pieces yet. The picture was still mostly dark, and the 72 hours were already counting down, and there were riders on the roads she couldn't see yet, And Mercer was somewhere in all of this doing the arithmetic on how much time and force it would take to bury this thing permanently. But she had the documents. She had Ellis. She had Dora riding toward a judge with the truth in a freight wagon. And she had this horse who had carried evidence across how many miles through how many hands chained to a post in the road outside her gate because someone believed she was the one who would know what to do with it. They had been right about her. She was just beginning to understand how completely they had been right. Ellis appeared at her shoulder. He leaned on the rail beside her, and they both looked at the horse for a moment without speaking. "Who left him at my gate?" she said. Ellis was quiet for a beat. "There's a man who works Mercer's operation," he said. "Runs the supply line between Cutter's Bluff and the main Mercer property north of the ridge. He was one of the original parcel owners, sold under duress, same as the others, but took a position with Mercer afterward because he had children to feed and nowhere else to go." He stopped. "His name is Henry Marsh. He's been passing us information for 8 months. He chained that horse in the road. He got the horse out of Mercer's stable the night before, risky as anything he'd ever done. He told me afterward that he used 3 chains because he needed it to look like a containment operation, not a delivery." Ellis glanced at her. "He said he knew Nathan's wife would know what chains meant to a living thing, that she wouldn't leave them on." Evelyn looked at the marks on the stallion's leg, healed now but still visible. "He was right," she said. "Nathan talked about you," Ellis said, quietly, not intrusively, just offering it. "When we were working together. He talked about how you ran that ranch, how you argued with the buyers at the livestock sale when they tried to cheat you, and how you always won." A pause. "He said you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met. He said it like it was the finest thing in the world." Evelyn didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The sun was dropping west, and somewhere in the mathematics of Silas Mercer's plan, a clock was ticking down. Somewhere in this territory, Nathan Carter was alive and held against his will, and 72 hours was a number that had seemed large this morning and felt considerably smaller now. Ellis pushed off the fence rail. "I need to tell you something else," he said. She looked at him. "Henry Marsh sent word this morning before I came here. Mercer's called in additional men from San Antonio, not riders, not the enforcement crew he used before." He held her gaze. "These are different men, the kind you hire when you're done being patient." The evening air settled around them, hot still, carrying the smell of dry grass and cedar and the distant creek. "How many?" she said. "Henry counted 12, Ellis said. "Arriving tonight." 12 men. Evelyn said the number to herself once quietly, the way you say something you need to make real before you can deal with it. 12 men arriving tonight. Not the riders Mercer had used before, not the kind you sent to intimidate a widow into compliance. The kind you sent when compliance was no longer the goal. She turned and walked back toward the house. Ellis fell into step beside her. "Henry's certain about the number," she said. "Henry counted the wire Mercer sent to San Antonio. He's the one who runs the supply line. He handles all incoming correspondence for the operation. 12 men professional arriving on the night stage from Laredo, connecting at Ridgeline." Ellis paused. "They'll be here by midnight." "And Henry, is he safe?" "For now. He sent word and went quiet. That's what we agreed when he sends the final warning. He goes dark and stays that way." A beat. "He has children, Mrs. Carter." "I know." She pushed open the kitchen door. "We protect him." Inside, she stood at the table and thought fast and hard. Ellis came in behind her. His 2 men, she'd learned their names by now, Will and Cutter, both former ranch hands who'd lost their own properties to Mercer's operation 2 years back, appeared at the door, and she waved them in. 4 people, against 12 professionals and whatever local enforcement Pike could bring. She looked at Ellis. "Alderman, if Dora reached your nephew, they left this afternoon. Best case, they arrive in Ridgeline by tomorrow morning." "That's too late," Will said from the doorway. He wasn't being pessimistic, just accurate. "Not necessarily," Evelyn said. She was already at Nathan's desk pulling out the second copy of the documentation, the backup she'd made before Dora left, because she'd learned 3 days ago that information only stayed safe when it existed in more than one place. Mercer doesn't know what Dora is carrying. He thinks his play is the tax notice and the 12 men and the 72-hour clock. He thinks I'm alone and frightened and running out of road. Aren't you? Cutter said. He said it without malice, genuinely asking. I'm frightened, she said, but I'm not alone, and I'm not out of road yet. She looked around the room. Here's what we're going to do. She gave them each a job, and she gave it clearly the way Nathan had always told her. She gave instructions like she'd already thought through the objections and settled them before anyone had a chance to raise them. Will rode out immediately, taking the south trail that avoided the ridge and the main road, carrying a sealed letter to the federal marshal's office in Laredo. It was a longer shot than Alderman. A marshal would need more time, more process. But Evelyn had written the letter anyway, because this was not a situation where you bet everything on a single hand. Cutter took a position in the hayloft above the barn with his rifle and a clear line of sight to the main gate and the road in both directions. Ellis stayed with her. You should go, she told him. You and your men. You've done more than anyone could ask. Caleb was my brother, he said, simply, ending the conversation. She didn't argue. They moved the stallion from the barn to the old root cellar behind the house, low stone-walled with a door that could be barred from the inside. Not comfortable for a horse, but safe. Hidden. Whatever happened tonight, the stallion was not going to be taken. The documents in the saddle blanket were not going to be found. That was the thing Mercer didn't understand about her yet, she thought. He'd calculated her situation correctly, the 72 hours, the isolation, the lack of legal recourse, but he'd miscalculated the woman. He thought she would be making decisions tonight based on what she stood to lose. He hadn't considered that she'd already lost the thing that mattered most, and that living through that had changed the mathematics of fear entirely. By 9 o'clock, the house was quiet and the yard was dark, and Evelyn sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees and listened to the summer night. Ellis sat on the steps below her. Tell me about Caleb, she said. Not because it was useful. Because Ellis was carrying it, and the night was long, and some things needed to be spoken out loud. He was quiet for a moment. Then he talked. He talked about his brother the way men talk about people they miss, in specifics, in small particular things that didn't add up to a person, but somehow did. Caleb had been stubborn to the point of stupidity sometimes. Caleb had kept a ridiculous dog that ate fence posts. Caleb had believed with the particular conviction of a man who'd read more history than was probably good for him, that systems of injustice were only ever beaten by people who refused to be reasonable about them. He would have liked you, Ellis said. He didn't know me. Nathan described you enough that he felt like he did. Ellis glanced back at her. He said once that Nathan's wife was the kind of woman who freed chained animals in the middle of the night and asked questions second. He meant it as a compliment. Evelyn almost smiled. Then she heard it. Hooves, coming fast on the road from the north. She was on her feet before Ellis finished standing. One rider, she said, listening hard, moving fast, not trying to be quiet. Ellis raised his rifle. The rider came through the gate without stopping and pulled up in the yard, and even in the dark, Evelyn recognized the horse, a bay mare she'd seen tied at the Cutter's Bluff Mercantile more than once. The rider was a woman. She was young, maybe 20, maybe less, in a working dress, with her hair half unpinned from riding hard. She was breathing fast, and her hands on the reins were shaking, but her voice when she spoke was steady in the way of someone who has decided to be brave and is holding on to that decision with everything she has. Mrs. Carter, she said. My name is Clara Marsh. Henry Marsh is my father. Evelyn lowered the rifle. Get down. Come inside. Clara Marsh sat at the kitchen table and accepted a glass of water and talked without stopping for 6 minutes, which was exactly how long it took her to say what she'd ridden 8 miles in the dark to say. Her father had gone dark as planned after sending his final warning to Ellis. But before he went dark, he'd heard one more thing. A conversation between Mercer and the man Mercer had put in charge of tonight's operation. A man named Taggart, who was apparently not new to this kind of work, and who had arrived in Cutter's Bluff that afternoon, ahead of the others. Nathan Carter was not being held on Mercer's main property. He was being held at the old Aldrich Mill, the second location on Ellis's canvas map. Evelyn's hand went flat on the table. "The mill," Ellis said very quietly. "Taggart mentioned it," Clara said. "Daddy heard the name. He said they were moving whoever they had there tonight before whatever's going to happen here." She looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were very clear, very young. "He said if you wanted to find your husband, Mrs. Carter, it had to be now, because after tonight he wouldn't be there anymore." The room was silent for 3 full seconds. Then Evelyn was moving. Ellis. She was already pulling on her coat, the revolver going into her pocket, the rifle in her hand. "The mill. How long to ride there?" 20 minutes on a fast horse, maybe 15 if we push." "Can your horse make it?" she asked Clara. "She made 8 miles in the dark," Clara said. "She can make 15 minutes more." "You're staying here," Evelyn said. Clara opened her mouth. "You've done everything right, and your father would want you inside 4 walls tonight." Evelyn said. It wasn't gentle and it wasn't unkind. It was simply true, and Clara Marsh was smart enough to know it. She closed her mouth and nodded. "Bar the door after we leave," Evelyn told her. "Cutter is in the hayloft. If anything comes to the gate before we're back, you call out to him, not out loud. Knock on the interior barn wall 3 times. He'll hear it." She looked at Ellis. "You're with me, obviously," he said. They rode. The mill was dark. They left the horses a 1/4 mile back, same as before, and went in on foot. Ellis took the east approach, and Evelyn took the west, moving parallel through the trees closing in from both sides. She could hear it before she could see it, not voices, but movement. The small sounds of a person in confined space. A shift of weight, the drag of something against wood. There was a guard at the door, one man standing just inside the mill entrance smoking. She could see the coal of his cigarette from 20 feet out. She looked across the clearing at Ellis. In the dark, she could barely see him, but she saw him hold up one finger, one guard. She held up her rifle. He shook his head, not yet. He pointed to himself, then to the eastern side of the mill wall, then made a gesture she understood, draw him out. She found a rock near her foot and threw it wide and hard into the brush to the north. The guard turned. Ellis moved. It was over in seconds, no shot fired, no raised voice. The guard went down, and Ellis dragged him into the brush, and that was that. Evelyn crossed the clearing and went through the door. The mill interior was darker than the outside. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, and listened. "Who's there?" said a voice. A man's voice, hoarse, like someone who hadn't had enough water, like someone who'd been somewhere too long without enough of anything. Her throat closed. She knew that voice. She had been hearing that voice in her sleep for 14 months, wondering if she would ever hear it again. "Nathan," she said. A sound. Not a word, something before words, something that came from deeper down. She moved toward it. He was in the back corner behind the millstone on the floor, hands bound in front of him, ankles hobbled with rope thinner than she'd ever seen him, and dirty and alive. Alive. She was on her knees beside him before she'd finished thinking about it. Her hands went to the ropes at his wrists. Evelyn. He said her name like he was confirming something he'd stopped believing was possible. "I'm here." Her fingers worked the knots. The rope was tight and old, and her hands were shaking for the first time in 3 days. "I'm here. Stop talking and let me get this." "How did you—" "Nathan." Her voice cracked slightly. She held it together. "I will explain everything, later. Right now I need you to let me work." He went quiet. She got his wrists free in 2 minutes. His ankles took longer. The hobble was a different knot, a nastier one, and she had to use the knife at her belt to cut through the last section of it. When it fell away, he tried to stand and couldn't. His legs had gone half numb from the position he'd been held in. She got her shoulder under his arm and took his weight without asking, and he let her, which told her more about what the last 14 months had cost him than anything he could have said. Ellis appeared in the doorway. "We need to move. Right now." "He can't walk on his own yet." "He doesn't have to." Ellis crossed the room and took Nathan's other arm. Between them, they got him to the door and through it. Outside, Nathan breathed in the night air like a man who'd forgotten what it tasted like. "The horses are a quarter mile," she said. "Can you make it?" He looked at her. His face was gaunt and stubbled, and the skin around his eyes was bruised from something she didn't ask about, not tonight. But his eyes were clear. "I've been making it for 14 months, he said. "A quarter mile is nothing." They walked. They were halfway to the horses when they heard it hoofbeats on the main road coming from the direction of Cutter's Bluff. Multiple horses, moving fast. Ellis looked at her. "Too fast for Mercer's men coming from town?" she said, thinking out loud. "Mercer's men would approach the ranch, not the mill. Nobody knows we're here." "Unless the guard got word out before I put him down," Ellis said. "He didn't have time." "Then who?" The riders came into sight at the Mill Road junction, and Evelyn brought her rifle up by reflex and then stopped. Because the man at the front of the group was wearing a badge. Not Pike's badge. A different badge. Federal. Beside him, barely visible in the dark, was a freight wagon. And on the seat of the freight wagon, sitting straight-backed and steady as a woman half her age, was Dora Finch. Evelyn lowered the rifle. "How?" Ellis said. "Alderman," Evelyn said. She understood it in pieces quickly. Dora had arrived in Ridgeline ahead of schedule. Her nephew must have pushed the horses after all. Alderman had read the documents. And Alderman, who was old and half-deaf and hated Ed Suttle and owed Mercer nothing, had apparently moved faster than anyone had anticipated. Dora climbed down from the wagon before it fully stopped. She crossed the road in the dark and looked at Nathan Carter, dirty thin, leaning on his wife's shoulder, and her expression did something complicated that settled into simple relief. "You look terrible," she said to him. "Mrs. Finch," Nathan said. "You have no idea how glad I am to see you." "I can imagine." She turned to Evelyn. "Judge Alderman issued the injunction 2 hours ago. The tax notice is void. He also sent a rider to the federal marshal in Laredo and one to Austin, and he came himself." She nodded toward the man with the federal badge. "That's Deputy Marshal Connors. He brought 4 men. 4 federal men. Ellis's 2 minus Will, who was already riding toward Laredo. Herself. Nathan, who couldn't stand on his own yet, but who would not, she knew, be persuaded to stay back. Against 12 men coming from Laredo and whatever Pike could bring. It was not comfortable numbers. "Connors needs the documentation," she said to Dora. "Already has it. He read it in the wagon on the way here." Dora paused. "He says it's enough." Evelyn looked at the federal marshal. He was a compact man, middle-aged, with the particular expression of someone who had seen a great deal of corruption in his career and had retained the capacity to be angry about it. "Mrs. Carter," Connors said, "your documentation names Deputy Pike as a co-signatory on 16 fraudulent land transfers. I have authority to take him into federal custody tonight." "He'll run," Ellis said. "He won't get far." Connors looked at the group assembled in the dark road. "Here's what I need to know right now. Mercer's hired men. 12 of them, according to your message. Where are they coming from?" "Night stage from Laredo connecting at Ridgeline," Ellis said. "They'd reach Cutter's Bluff by midnight." Connors looked at the sky, estimated the hour. "We have time." "For what?" Evelyn said. "To be waiting for them," Connors said, "instead of the other way around." She looked at Nathan. He was listening, his jaw set, his eyes focused. "Ellis's man is still in the hayloft," she said. "Clara Marsh is at the house." "Clara came to you," Nathan said sharply. "She brought us the information that led us to you," Evelyn said. Something crossed his face. "Henry kept his word." "Henry kept his word," she confirmed. Nathan straightened against her shoulder. Not fully steady, not yet, but straightening. "Then let's not waste it," he said. The ride back to the ranch was fast and strange. Strange because she was riding beside Nathan, which she had not done in 14 months, and the reality of it kept arriving in waves she didn't have time to process. He was real. He was thin and hurt, and his hands shook slightly when he took the reins. But he was real, and he was here. And they were riding side by side in the Texas dark, like the world hadn't fallen apart and been rebuilt in a year. She didn't reach for him. Not yet. There would be time for that. She had to believe there would be time for that, but right now there was no room for it. Right now there was a ranch at the end of this road and 12 hired men on a midnight stage and a deputy sheriff who was going to run the moment he understood what was happening. She focused on the road. Nathan rode closer than he needed to. She noticed that. She didn't say anything about it. They were half a mile from the gate when a shot cracked from the direction of the hayloft. Single shot. Warning shot, cutter's signal. Someone had arrived at the ranch ahead of them. Evelyn pushed her horse forward. They came through the gate hard and fast, and Evelyn saw it immediately. 3 horses tied at the south fence that didn't belong there, and a light burning in the kitchen window that she had not left burning. "Pike," Nathan said from beside her. Not a question. "Has to be," Ellis said. Connors pulled up beside her. "How many entrances to the house?" "Front door, kitchen door, 2 windows on the ground floor." She was already reading the yard cutter's position in the hayloft, gave him sight lines on the front and east side, but the kitchen door faced west, and the angle was bad from up there. That's why he'd fired a warning shot instead of doing something about it himself. Whatever was happening at that kitchen door, he couldn't cover it. "Clara's inside," she said. That settled it. She was off her horse before Connors finished organizing his men. Nathan grabbed her arm, not stopping her, steadying himself so he could come with her. "You can barely stand," she said. "I've been sitting in a mill for 14 months, he said. "I can walk to my own kitchen." She didn't have time to argue. They went together. Connors took his men around the east side. Ellis moved low and fast toward the barn covering the yard. Evelyn and Nathan went straight up the middle toward the front door, which was the last thing Pike would be watching for a direct approach. No hesitation, no attempt at concealment. She opened her own front door and walked in. Pike was in the kitchen. He had Clara Marsh backed against the far wall, not touching her, not threatening her with anything overt, just standing between her and the door, in the particular way of a man who understood that his physical presence was threat enough. He had his badge and his gun, and the absolute certainty up until this exact moment that he was the most dangerous thing in this building. He turned when they came in. His eyes went to Evelyn, then to Nathan. Something happened in his face that she would remember for a long time. Not fear exactly, because Pike was not a man built for visible fear. It was more like a calculation failing in real time. Like watching a man add a column of numbers and arrive at a total that couldn't be right, and add them again and get the same impossible answer. "Nathan Carter," he said. "Harlan," Nathan said. His voice was steady. Steadier than hers would have been, she thought, if she'd been held in a mill for over a year by men operating under the protection of someone who wore the same badge as the man who'd filed her husband's disappearance as a wilderness accident. "You want to put that hand away from your sidearm," Connors said from the kitchen doorway. He'd come around faster than she'd expected. 2 of his men were behind him. Pike looked at the federal badge, looked at Nathan, looked at Evelyn. He took his hand away from his gun. "I'm placing you under federal arrest," Connors said, "on charges of fraudulent land transfer, falsification of county records, and unlawful detention." He crossed the room and removed Pike's weapon, and Pike let him, which told her that whatever else Pike was, he was not stupid. Stupid men fought when the math was against them. Pike understood the math. Clara Marsh let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a very long time. She looked at Evelyn, and her eyes were bright, and her chin was up, and she looked in that moment exactly like a woman whose father had raised her right. "You all right?" Evelyn asked. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "He just wanted to know where you'd gone." "I told him I didn't know." She paused. "I don't think he believed me." "It didn't matter," Evelyn said. "You held long enough." Pike said nothing through all of this. He submitted to the restraints Connors put on him with the controlled stillness of a man who was already somewhere else in his mind, calculating probably what he could offer, what he could trade, how much of Mercer's operation he could put on the table in exchange for leniency. She recognized it because she had spent 3 days learning to read that category of man. They were all the same underneath. They served power until power stopped protecting them, and then they served themselves. Connors walked Pike out. The kitchen was quieter without him in it. Nathan had put his hand on the back of a chair to keep himself upright, and she could see that the walk had cost him more than he'd admitted. She crossed to him without saying anything, and put her hand over his on the chair back. He turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them spoke. There wasn't anything to say yet that fit inside words. The 12 men from the Laredo stage arrived at 20 past midnight. They came up the main road in a group, which was their first mistake. A professional advance didn't bunch like that, and it told Evelyn something about what kind of professionals they actually were. Hired muscle, not military men. Men accustomed to arriving somewhere that was already frightened. They were not arriving somewhere frightened. Connors had his 4 men positioned at the gate before they turned off the road. Ellis and Cutter were at the fence line. Evelyn stood on the porch with the rifle, and Nathan stood beside her, not because he was capable of rapid action right now, but because it was his gate and his name on the deed, and some statements needed to be made without words. The group pulled up when they saw the federal badges. The man at the front, Taggart, she assumed the one Henry Marsh had named, looked at the assembly in front of him for a long moment without speaking, assessed it, counted it. "Federal Deputy Marshal Connors," Connors said from the gate. "You're on private property. I have a federal injunction voiding the tax proceeding that brought you here, and I have outstanding warrants for Silas Mercer on 16 counts of land fraud. Whatever arrangement you made with him is dissolved." A pause. "I'd advise you to turn around." Taggart looked at the porch, looked at Nathan Carter standing on his own land. He turned around. All 12 of them, without a word, without a shot, rode back the way they came. Ellis lowered his rifle from the fence line and said something under his breath that she didn't catch and didn't need to. Cutter laughed a short, relieved sound that cracked the tension in the yard like a stone through ice. Evelyn let out a breath. Beside her, Nathan said quietly, "That's one thing settled." "One thing?" She agreed. "Where's Mercer?" "Not here," Connors said, coming back up the lane. "We'll have him by morning. Man like that doesn't run well. He's got too much to protect and too many places he feels safe. That's always the weakness." He stopped at the porch steps. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, I need formal statements from both of you. Tonight if you're willing." "Tonight?" Nathan said. "Nathan?" she started. "Tonight," he said again. "I've waited long enough to say it out loud." She looked at him. His jaw was set and his eyes were clear, and he was still holding her hand, and she understood that for him, this wasn't about endurance. It was about the fact that he had been silent for 14 months, held and silenced, and made to disappear, and he was done with that. Done with it completely. "Tonight," she said. They sat at Nathan's desk until 2 in the morning. Connors was thorough and patient, and asked good questions, the kind that built a foundation rather than just collected facts. Nathan talked, and Evelyn listened to things she hadn't known the details of the trip to Ridgeline, the moment he'd understood he was being followed, the choice he'd made to hide the documentation before they took him, rather than carry it on his person. "I got the horse to Henry Marsh before they caught up with me," Nathan said. "I knew if Mercer's people took me and the documentation both it was finished, but if I could separate them." He stopped. "Henry understood what I was asking. He's a good man in a terrible position. He's been in that position for 2 years." "We'll need his testimony," Connor said. "He'll give it," Nathan said. "He's been wanting to give it. He just needed to know it would matter." Connors looked at the tin box of documents on the table, and Caleb Rowan's hidden letter and the copies of the survey maps and the list of 9 names with refused written beside each one. "It'll matter," he said. Evelyn believed him. She believed him not because she was naive about how slowly justice moved, or how often it arrived incomplete, but because she had sat in this house for 3 days, watching evidence accumulate and connections solidify and threads pull tight, and she understood now that what Nathan and Caleb and Ellis had built was not a fragile thing. It had survived a year of active suppression. It had survived Caleb's disappearance, and Nathan's captivity, and Mercer's riders, and Pike's badge, and 16 fraudulent documents signed and sealed and filed in a county office. It was still here. She was still here. Mercer was arrested the following morning. Connors rode out to the main Mercer property at first light with 2 of his men and the federal warrants, and Silas Mercer clean boots, good hat. The salesman's face assembled for morning opened his own front door and looked at the federal marshal and understood in that single moment that the thing he'd been doing for 3 years had ended. He asked for a lawyer. Connors gave him the name of one in Austin and put him in irons. Evelyn was not there for it. She heard about it from Ellis, who heard it from Will, who had ridden back from Laredo by noon with confirmation that the federal land office had received Dora's letter and was opening a full investigation into the water corridor transfers. She was in the kitchen when she got the news, making coffee. She didn't particularly need doing something with her hands, because her hands wanted to be doing something. "It's done," Ellis said. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him. "The investigation isn't done." "No, but Mercer's in custody, and Pike's in custody, and the injunction is standing, and the land claims are frozen pending federal review." He wrapped his hands around the cup. "The men those properties were taken from, or their families, they're going to get them back." She thought about Tom Aldrich, who'd sold fast and moved his family to Oklahoma. About the 8 other names on Nathan's list. About what it would mean to those families, some of them scattered now, some of them gone too long to return to be told that the land was theirs again. That what had been taken from them was taken by fraud, and the fraud was proven. It wasn't everything. It wasn't Caleb Rowan alive. It wasn't the years those families had spent somewhere other than home. But it was the truth standing up in the light where it couldn't be buried anymore. "Where will you go?" she asked Ellis. He looked at her. "I thought I'd see if the Rowan sheep camp was still habitable." "It is." Titus looked at it when he rode up. "Then I'll go home." He said it like a man who hadn't said it in a long time, like the word had a new weight to it. "I'll go home." Dora came back in the afternoon. She came in through the kitchen door the way she always did, without knocking, with her shawl around her shoulders and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. And she looked at the kitchen at Nathan sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and some color returning to his face, and she set down her bag and pulled out a chair and sat down as if the world had been rearranged and she was simply finding her place in it again. "You look better," she said to Nathan. "I've had coffee," he said, "and Evelyn fed me." "Good." Dora looked at Evelyn. "Alderman sends his regards. He also says he expects full written statements within the week, and he does not accept handwriting he cannot read." "Tell him he'll have them," Evelyn said. "I already told him." Dora accepted the cup Evelyn put in front of her. "Clara Marsh went home this morning. Before sunrise, I gave her a letter for her father." "What did it say?" Evelyn sat down. "That what he did mattered. That Caleb's name is going to be in the federal record as the man who started this investigation. That his daughter rode 8 miles in the dark and didn't flinch." She paused. "And that if there's anything this ranch can do for his family, the answer is yes." Dora nodded. She drank her coffee. She did not make a production out of any of it, which was one of the things Evelyn valued most about her. Outside, she heard Titus moving through the yard, the familiar sound of his boots on the dry ground, the squeak of the water trough handle. the ordinary sounds of a working morning. She hadn't known 3 days ago how much those sounds meant to her, how much she had needed them to still be there. Nathan said, "I want to see the horse." "He's in the root cellar still," she said. "I haven't moved him yet." "Let's move him." They went out together. She opened the root cellar door, and the stallion came out blinking into the afternoon sun, tossing his head once like a man who has been indoors too long, and is reminding himself what the sky looks like. Nathan put his hand on the animal's neck and stood there for a moment without speaking. She watched him. She watched the way his hand moved familiar, certain the touch of a man who knew this animal. And she watched the horse lean into it, the same patience, the same quality of attention he had given her in the barn on that first night. "I named him," Nathan said. "What?" "I named him before I gave him to Henry to hold. I know you're not supposed to name an animal you might have to let go of." He glanced at her, a hint of something that was almost a smile. "I named him anyway." "What did you call him?" Nathan looked at the horse. "Stayed," he said. "Because that's what he did. Every time I thought he was gone, he stayed." She looked at the stallion. Stayed. It was a strange name and a perfect name, and it was exactly the kind of name Nathan Carter would give an animal because he was a man who paid attention to the truth of things and named them accordingly. She reached out and took Nathan's hand. He held it without looking at her. They stood there in the summer afternoon with the horse between them and the ranch around them, and the long wait of 14 months somewhere at their backs. Not gone, it wouldn't simply be gone, but changed. Set down. Transformed from something that had been breaking her into something she had carried and survived. "I have to tell you about the last 14 months, she said. "I know." "Not now." "No," he agreed. "Not now." They stood in the quiet. The federal investigation took 4 months. It was slow and thorough and unglamorous. The way real justice mostly is. Depositions, documentation reviews, land records going back 12 years, surveyors re-walking boundaries that had been deliberately obscured. Connors made the trip from Laredo 3 times. Alderman corresponded weekly with the Austin Land Office. Ellis Rowan gave his testimony in Ridgeline on a Tuesday in October, dressed in his best clothes, sitting straight-backed and clear-eyed in front of a federal examiner who wrote down every word. 7 of the 9 dispossessed families received formal restoration of their land claims. 2 parcels had been resold to third parties who'd bought in good faith and were compensated from the seized Mercer holdings instead. It was not a perfect outcome. It was a real one. Silas Mercer stood trial in Austin in November. He was convicted on 11 of 16 counts of land fraud, 2 counts of unlawful detention, and 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation. He was sentenced to 12 years. His lawyer argued the sentence was excessive. The judge disagreed. Harlan Pike received 8 years. He had cooperated with the investigation in exchange for a reduced charge, and his testimony had filled several of the gaps in the documentation, which was useful and which she chose to view as the last productive act of a man who had otherwise wasted his position and his authority for 3 years of personal gain. She did not feel sorry for him. She didn't feel much of anything about him at all, which was its own kind of conclusion. Henry Marsh was given formal immunity in exchange for his testimony, which had been the most direct and detailed account of the operation's day-to-day mechanics. He stayed in Cutter's Bluff. He kept his position in the supply trade rebuilt under new management of the former Mercer properties. Clara visited the Carter Ranch twice that fall, and Evelyn taught her how to put up preserves, and neither of them spoke about the night Clara had ridden 8 miles in the dark, because some things are better carried quietly than spoken about too much. Caleb Rowan's name was entered into the federal land record as the originating investigator of the case. Ellis had asked for that, and Connors had made it happen. It was a small thing and a permanent thing, and Ellis had stood at his brother's unmarked grave, which they'd found in November on the edge of the old Mercer property, and read the record entry aloud, which was the only funeral Caleb had ever gotten, and which was in its way sufficient. On the last evening of November, when the heat of summer was long gone and the air had the first real edge of cold in it, Evelyn sat on the porch. Nathan came out and set a cup of coffee on the rail beside her and leaned on the post at the top of the steps. In the paddock, Stade moved along the fence line back where he belonged. Coat glossy. Now weight restored the evidence that had been in the saddle blanket long since transferred to a federal vault in Austin, where it would stay until the last appeal was exhausted. He was just a horse now. An extraordinary one, but just a horse. Dora thinks we should rebuild the north fence before spring, Nathan said. Dora's right. She usually is. He was quiet for a moment. The Aldrich family is coming back. Tom Aldrich wrote to say they'll take the property back in the spring. Good. She meant it completely. He turned and looked at her. She looked back at him. They had been doing that more lately, just looking without needing to fill the space. She had spent 14 months not knowing if she would ever look at him again. She did not take it for granted. She didn't think she ever would. I owe you an accounting, he said. You don't. I left without ye, Nathan. She kept her voice even. You left to do the right thing. You got caught doing the right thing. That's not a debt. She picked up her coffee. It's just what happened. He was quiet. What I want, she said, is for you to stop leaving without saying where you're going. That's fair, he said. And I want you to eat more. Also fair. And, she said, I want you to stop acting like you owe me something for surviving the time you were gone. I made choices too. I freed that horse. I read your papers. I sent Dora to Ridgeline with a tin box and a freight wagon. Those were my choices. She looked at him directly. We're even, Nathan. We've always been even. That's the whole point of us. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, All right. And he sat down beside her, and they drank their coffee in the November evening, and Stade moved along the fence in the last light, and the Carter Ranch sat quiet and whole on the land. It had always stood on, and would go on standing on proof, if proof were needed. That the truth, given enough time and enough people who refused to let it stay buried, always found its way into the open. Evelyn had freed a chained horse in the middle of a summer night, not knowing what it would cost her, not knowing what it would take. She knew now. It had taken everything she had, and it had been exactly enough.